Could a cure for cancer be closer than you think? Welcome to Live from Stage 4, where NBC takes center stage as we talk to experts, share inspiring stories, break down science, and shine the spotlight on what matters most. Because when it comes down to it, the spot, for us and by us, is all about us. What if the decades of progress against cancer, the breakthroughs, the rising survival rates, the new vaccines and cutting-edge therapies were suddenly put in jeopardy? 5 decades after the war on cancer began, the US has built a world-class research engine that has pushed survival from roughly 49% in the 1970s to about 68% today. But that hard-won momentum now faces existential threats: canceled grants and clinical trials, proposals to slash the National Cancer Institute budget, and an unprecedented politicization of biochemical research funding. I am Victoria Goldberg, and in this episode, we ask the urgent question: can we save research and the patients who depend on it? I'm joined by Pam Traxel, Senior Vice President at the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network and a lifelong patient advocate. Pam's journey from politics to advocacy gives her a rare view of how policy and personal stories intersect. But first, Abigail Johnston is here to describe what funding cuts mean in practical, heartbreaking terms: halted clinical trials, lost opportunities for patients, and the emotional and financial toll on families. Her account underscores why the stakes are so high and why action can't wait. Listen for a conversation that's part policy primer and part patient testimony, and all call to action. Protecting cancer research is protecting lives.
Hello, my name is Abigail Johnston, and I have been a lawyer in the state of Florida since 2002. In my role as an advocate over the years, I've done a variety of things, but since my de novo stage 4 metastatic breast cancer diagnosis in 2017, I have utilized my training and experience to help other patients. That might mean help other patients fight with their insurance companies to get something covered, help other patients find medication they might be eligible to take through the compassionate use provisions of the law here in the United States, and otherwise supported patients and families through our legal process. In the past few months of 2025, I've worked with a variety of families whose lives have been affected by the changes in funding, and that has been, for quite a few people, the end of their life. Because when a clinical trial is the last resort, it's the only medication that might potentially work for someone. If that clinical trial is abruptly stopped for whatever reason, some people don't have any other options. And so I put together a composite of a variety of stories, de-identified, of course, that I'd like to read for you to highlight how individuals and their families are being affected by changes in funding, mostly canceling funding. And that has been catastrophic for quite a few people. So imagine that you are living with a life-threatening or a terminal disease, and you're told that the only and/or the perfect treatment is a clinical trial. Nothing else has worked for very long, and you're running out of time. So you complete a ton of paperwork, and having participated in 8 clinical trials myself, can tell you that the amount of paperwork required to enroll in a clinical trial is quite daunting. So you complete all that paperwork, the legwork, the medical testing, you raise money, perhaps from friends, perhaps from neighbors. Maybe you do this on the internet. Maybe you had to acquire a visa and leave everything behind for a clinical trial in another country. Maybe you sell your car, sublet your apartment, quit your job, drop out of school, all to move to the trial site. So you pack up yourself, your loved ones, maybe your parents, your kids, your dog, your iguana. Why? To get the best treatment. Right? That's what we want. The best treatment, the best chance to live with the most innovative treatments. They might just give you more time. So you put every egg in that basket. You present yourself at the institution conducting the trial, only to be told there's no more funding, no more options, no more treatment. So what do? Your options are fewer, and they're not nearly as good as that clinical trial you spent all of your precious time, precious energy, precious money preparing for. Trying for another clinical trial requires more time, more resources, more everything. And that's not the one you and your team thought would have the best chance of working. Perhaps you convince your local team to utilize the compassionate use option through the FDA to try another medication that isn't yet approved by the FDA. However, that statute might allow you access to that particular drug, but it does not require the company to give that medication to you for free. And most medications that is in clinical trials will cost many six figures in order to be able to participate out of pocket. You could try another FDA-approved medication if that's an option for you, or as happened with each of the families that I have personally worked with, their loved one entered hospice and did not survive long. This is the conundrum that we are facing as MBC patients, as cancer patients, as patients with various difficult diseases, children as young as 5 years old, great-grandmothers in their 90s, fathers in their 40s, college professors, single moms, janitors, judges, Black, white, Hispanic, straight, gay, cis, and trans immigrants, and those of us who are perhaps in this country since the Mayflower. No one is immune to this conundrum. No one is immune to this situation, as the very foundation of the system that allows medications to be approved in this country by the FDA, as that system is disrupted in so many different ways. No one is immune. Just suddenly being told that the life-saving medication, the life-saving protocol, the treatment that will give you more time with your family, as those are disappearing. Everyone who pursues a clinical trial sacrifices tremendously for that opportunity. They accept a significantly elevated risk to their very life, to their bodies, to their organs. When people participate in clinical trials, they are allowing an entity, whether that's the government or a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company, fill in the blank. We as individuals are allowing someone to experiment on our bodies, and that is a gigantic responsibility. Some patients have been told that the funds may be unfrozen at some later date. Some funds have been unfrozen haphazardly, but patients, people living with serious and life-threatening diagnoses don't have time. There are many healthy people in this country who are able to take the long view, who are able to say, okay, I'll pursue something when the climate is better, when the climate is different, when the funding issues have been sorted out. But for some of us, when that medication is the one thing that may prolong our lives, we don't have that time. And we do not have the luxury of playing the long game.
Next, Pam Traxel breaks down how federal funding fuels basic science, clinical trials, and drug development, explains why patient voices matter in shaping laws, and shares real examples of how advocacy has changed public health, from smoke-free laws to lives saved. She offers candid, compassionate advice for people living with metastatic disease about using their voices to protect research that could change everything.
Why don't we start? It's so amazingly good to see you. In one of the podcasts you did, you said that cancer, and I love that cancer is the scariest word in English language today.
We don't do polling, but other people do polling, and that's what they say.
So I wanted to ask you, Why did you decide to dedicate your life to the scariest word in English language? Tell me a little bit about you and what made you come to American Cancer Society.
That's a really interesting question. So I have been at the American Cancer Society at the Cancer Action Network now for 18 and a half years. And my background before coming here was all in politics. When I was a college student, I thought that I would get a degree in political science because I wanted to change the world. I spent almost 20 years working to elect members at all levels of government and maybe kind of learned the hard way that politics is not all it's cracked up to be. And it doesn't change the world the way you think it's going to. And so I got the opportunity when the Cancer Society was beginning to form. Cancer Action Network, it was just a couple of years old, and they were looking for a staffer. And I said I wanted to work in a nonprofit. And so then a marriage was born.
Is it a happy marriage?
It's a very happy marriage, and I'll tell you why. I wish that I knew that patient advocacy was a thing. When I was in college, I always tell young people that patient advocacy is like a real thing. And in fact, there's a master's degree program in patient advocacy that one of the universities has. And it is a way to do two things that are really important to me: improve the lives of real people, the patients that we serve, and make a difference in the world all at the same time. And I never really got that from politics. And then as I've worked here all these years, obviously my life has been deeply touched by cancer. And I tell people, if you haven't had cancer touch your life, it's really just a matter of time before it actually does. I think it's really important to think about what patient advocates can do to make this world a better place, because everyone suffers from disease. And in fact, someone in the United States is diagnosed with cancer every 15 seconds. So if we think about the course of this interview, how many people are going to be hearing those horrible words that they have cancer? It's really quite stunning.
But the fact is, and you're absolutely right, and I hope with our patient advocacy and what we do, people are now less afraid of that word. It used to be taboo, but now, even for people with our diagnosis, and we're all here, all of us are living with stage 4 breast cancer, and we are living with stage 4 breast cancer. So why don't we tell people what you do and what exactly is ACS-CAN?
Oh, so that's a good point. So what is ACS-CAN? ACS-CAN is the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. So we are the public policy arm of the Cancer Society. We were founded in 2001. Really, our primary focus is to make sure that we are doing everything we can to share cancer patients and their families' stories with elected officials at the local, state, and federal levels. So we are 200 people strong who work in every state capital and at the federal level to make sure that laws and policies benefit cancer patients and their families.
200 people. Let me actually repeat this. 200 people. Wow.
Yeah, we're big. It's because we work in every state. We also work in Puerto Rico too. And we do some stuff in Guam. So we don't even ignore the territories. Sometimes when people say, like, I don't really understand what you do, I remind people, many of your audience, I think, will remember when you could smoke a lot of places. One of our earliest accomplishments is working to pass smoke-free laws. And that is really great because we have whole generations of Americans that have never been to a restaurant, a bar, a workplace, or, wait for it, ridden on an airplane where you could smoke. Imagine that. Every time I fly, I always thank secretly Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois. He was one of the primary authors of the law to ban smoking on commercial aircraft. And I am always deeply thankful because I don't really enjoy flying, and I really would not enjoy it if people were smoking while I was on the plane with them. But to me, that is a really good example of why public policy change is so critically important in the fight against cancer. And I don't think people think about policy, and it doesn't really add up to people. But when I say smoke-free laws, they're like, oh, got it. So like that. And I'm like, right, like that.
No, you're absolutely right. Because when I started in patient advocacy, they were telling me right off the bat, there are research advocates, there are policy advocates, there is this and that. And I was Policy? What's policy? So I think it's so important to have you here and to talk to us what difference we can make.
I know so many women that have metastatic breast cancer. I think it's a very heavy burden. Women in that space. I was having a conversation with a relative who actually is a patient advocate in a totally different disease. She's in the process of forming a nonprofit. And she said, well, at the support groups, there are these people and there are these people, and they're different, and we need to do things differently. And I said, right, like in the cancer community, I often find that people with metastatic disease need their own kind of resources and support because their experience with this disease is very different than someone who might have a more acute experience with the disease. And I think we need to recognize the difference. Cancer should be cancers, and it's an umbrella term. And there are many types of this disease that have very little to do with the type of cancer that you might personally be experiencing. And that I think can be very frustrating for patients and families as they try and explain what their experience is with cancer, because it can be very different. And honestly, it can be very different even if you have the same diagnosis, if I'm being totally honest.
Well, yeah, this is a whole big issue. Cancer is unique. You are N of one. All of us are N of one. Our experience is not the same as other people's experiences. And more than that, like breast cancer itself is not one disease, it's many diseases. But early stage breast cancer and metastatic breast cancer, completely different diseases. And on the positive note, some types of breast cancer are becoming more chronic and more curable. And that's a good message to send. It's not all doom and gloom. But let's talk a little bit about doom and gloom. So, and before we get to that, I've interviewed a number of people about this, and I'm learning so much. But I think a lot of us who are living with the disease, we don't really understand the health ecosystem. We don't really understand the key stages, how a drug is developed. We don't know how it's discovered, how it actually becomes a drug, how it gets from the discovery to the market production. So do you think you could just give us a little overview?
Well, it's kind of interesting. So I think maybe before we even think about drugs for a minute, we need to think about basic science. And this is really like what you learn in high school, like biology, right? And chemistry.
Not all of us.
Oh, some.
Yeah, some of us, right.
Really understanding how cancer happens. So cancer comes when cells divide, which they divide every minute of every day. And sometimes when your cells divide, something goes wrong. And that becomes a cancer. And then those cancer cells grow over time. And in a healthy immune system, for the most part, your body is able to kill those cells. But for example, and I always use smoking as a good example because I think a lot of people understand it, you can imagine the cells in your lungs. Lungs have a lot of cells. They're dividing all the time. Y'all can think about that for a minute. And then you smoke, and that smoke goes into your lungs, right? And those chemicals go into your lungs, and then they touch the cell, and bad things happen. So that's one of the ways that this happens. There are also hereditary reasons why people get cancer. There are all kinds of reasons. So there's a lot of work that's done at the really basic level, like not individual patient, not individual cancer. Inside a pharma company, though, one of the things that they're doing is they're really working on thinking about different compounds, whether they be small molecules or biologics, and how they interact with cancer cells. And they have a lot of theories. You hear a lot about targeted therapies. Well, targeted therapies are ones that interrupt some of the way cancer cells multiply. And there's a lot of different ways. You hear key and lock and all these different analogies. But companies spend a lot of time really thinking about this, and they begin a trial at phase 1, and they're thinking about the science and the safety and efficacy. Like, if we give this person the drug, does anything bad happen to them? Because the person's, and these are in healthy people, right? So healthy people, no reaction, great. It's safe in people. And then they're like, okay, now we're going to take it into a phase 2 trial. And this is where oncology is very different, because while there are technically multiple stages in drug development in oncology, if things are going well, they move very quickly. And in most cancers, we're talking about progression-free survival. So that means your cancer cells in a solid tumor are not increasing. And if you're really, really lucky, the patient lives longer. But sometimes in cancer, all we're thinking about is, does the tumor stop growing? Which, if you have cancer, we all know that that's such a big deal. The challenge with this is that I'm going to use an analogy my boss used one time. So a former boss of mine, he worked at Boeing, and he told me that when Boeing builds an airplane, when they announce that they're building an airplane, their stock goes down because of the cost that they're about to spend. But not one time does Boeing build a plane and not think that it can fly. They're really confident. Now, people may not buy the plane, but they know it can fly. Drug development's a little bit different. They have a theory about how this is going to work in an actual patient. And they have a lot of science behind why they think it's going to work. And yet, in the end, only a very small percentage of drugs that start in the very beginning of drug development make it to the end, less than 10%. And to produce a drug, I mean, costs like $1 billion. Like, this is a lot of money over many, many, many years, 10 years, 20 years. And you can go back and look at different drugs that have been developed that have become quite famous. A good example of that would be Gleevec, which a lot of cancer patients know about, even if they don't take it. I would say bringing a drug to market is threading a very specific needle, and it's not exactly the easiest thing to do because many times people think that the drug that they're creating is going to make a real big difference. And then actually, when they get into that phase 3 trial, they find out it doesn't have the impact that it did. And they've been working on it for years and years and years. And it's what makes, I think, the fight against cancer and all diseases really, really difficult because it's not exactly like making a cake or something where, okay, you make the cake and, it doesn't rise or it doesn't taste as good. It's a very difficult process.
But even if we talk about phase 1 trial, even to get to a phase 1 trial, there is a tremendous amount of work that goes into it before that. So as far as I know, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, that industry, they don't run early trials.
No, they do. I would say generally they do run early trials as scientists at universities run early trials, but these are usually, for the most part, small biotech companies, sometimes couple people in a folding table that have an idea that rent lab space to figure something out. They have an idea of how they think the cells are going to interact with this particular product and react differently. I think that the challenge is most of the early science work that's done on drugs is done in mice or in mouse models. And many times we find drugs that cure cancer in mice. But human beings are not mice, right? And so there's a lot that's different with us. And to the point of you were discussing before, with every cancer patient being an N of 1, we say that cancer patients have on average 5 comorbidities. You never really know how all those comorbidities impact how that patient is living with that particular disease. And that's what makes us kind of different than the mice that they test these original drugs on. Like the mice are doing pretty well. And that's good. That's a good sign. That's where it starts. If the mouse does not do well, then the drug doesn't move forward. But it is complicated where it starts in this very early stage and then it kind of needs to move on. And I think that that's the challenging part of fighting cancer.
Right. Thank you. And that brings us back to what we started talking about. What role do the NCI and the NIH play in cancer research? Why is their funding so crucial for the future of science and scientific innovation?
So I would say it's so hard for people to understand this, but there are 2 things that I like to point out. Science is a team sport. So if you've ever paid attention to the Nobel Prize, very rarely is it awarded to one person. It's almost always awarded to a team of scientists. And in some cases, those team of scientists don't even work together. They make the same discovery around the same time, and the Nobel Committee recognizes them for their work. So I think sometimes we think about different analogies for science. We maybe think about like athletics where, you're a gymnast or a swimmer or a golfer. Those are not team sports. This is more like football or hockey or baseball where you can be really, really good and still not achieve a championship or something like that. So when we think about the team that is science, the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute represent really important funding in understanding the basic biologies of cancer. Also, the National Cancer Institute invests in a lot of research around things that a drug company would never invest in. How does smoking impact when you take chemotherapy? What kind of palliative care best supports a cancer patient through their journey? And a lot of modalities that are not specifically focused on drug development, because drug development's like, biology, chemistry is a very specific part of science. There's a larger array of work that needs to be done in this space. And so, really, when we think about the backbone of research across our country, the federal government, through the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute, is the largest funder of research in our country. And their dollars don't just sit in Washington, D.C., they get funded to universities all across the country. I think when people get a little bit confused about that, I remind them of a project that I think many people have heard of before, which is called the Human Genome Project. So it's a project actually that the National Institutes of Health did that mapped out the human genome. Now, this is one of the most important things in cancer research because we better understand cells and how our body and how the genomics of our body work. It is these genomics that are allowing large pharma companies to work on specific things that improve those genomes, that work to fix some of the deficiencies in those genomes that causes cancer. Without that backbone research, I can easily say we would not have made the progress against cancer that we have. It took a very long time for that project to get done. No company would have ever funded that work because it's not really commercially viable by itself. And I think that's why funding the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute are so important, because who knows what other projects we need to do. Just because we understand kind of DNA and RNA, I always tell people there are other parts of the alphabet that we need to explore. And when we think about metastatic breast cancer in particular, we have a lot to understand about why cancers metastasize, how we can stop that, how we can, I don't know, reverse that. Is that a thing? How would that work? Obviously, there's a lot there to be unpacked. And again, that would far extend outside of potentially what one company might be able to do, right? And that's why we need a really strong cancer research infrastructure across our country. The more brains, the better. Like, we need more people in this space.
Oh, yeah, undoubtedly. So this is a tricky question, I think, because it changes every day. But I will ask you, so what's the current state of federal funding right now?
Well, so the current state of federal funding, it's back to school season across the country, which means soon our Congress will be back at work after a really nice summer break. So earlier this year, the president proposed a cut of funding to the National Institutes of Health, a 40% cut and a 37% cut to the National Cancer Institute. These are the largest cuts. When we come back here in September, the House will work on their budget. The federal government works on a really weird year. October 1st begins the new fiscal year. And so hopefully Congress will work really, really hard and pass a budget for this next fiscal year that starts October 1st that represents an increase in funding for the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute. I think the Senate committee decision to increase the funding is a great start. I think that there is a lot of bipartisan support. But this is a difficult political environment, and we need every voice to speak up and say why federal funding for research is a really important thing and why we all want our tax dollars to be spent in this way. I remind people that the federal government's primary source of revenue is our tax dollars. I know how much we all enjoy paying taxes. We should use our voices to make sure our taxes are being used to fund what we want them to fund. And this would be a great example of how those dollars could be used.
Quick update. The House's Appropriations Committee approved the fiscal year 2026 Labor HHS Education Bill. It keeps the NIH funding about flat at $46.9 billion and gives National Cancer Institute roughly $7.27 billion, a bit less than the Senate wanted. It also cuts Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health from $1.5 billion to about $945 million, which worries researchers because Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health funds high-risk, high-reward projects. American Society of Clinical Oncology is urging lawmakers to protect strong cancer research funding as negotiations continue.
This is wonderful. You're so good at getting me to segue what I wanted to talk to you next. It's just perfect. You're laying it out for me. So my next question was going to be, and it's going to be, I read because I did a little homework that you guys just put up billboards only a few days ago in some of the southern states.
Yes.
So tell us about it.
Yeah, so we've launched a Protecting Cancer Cures campaign that is focused on the senators and the House of Representatives members who work on the appropriations committees. That's a fancy word for the Budget Committee of the United States. They decide where the money gets spent. And so we've actually put up a number of billboards in key congressional districts reminding folks about the danger of cutting cancer research funding. I'm really pleased to say that some of the billboards we've put up in Alabama, which has both a US senator and a House member who are appropriators, which is kind of unusual, they've really taken notice. And in fact, Senator Katie Britt from Alabama is a research champion. She has really responded, and she was a leader in a Republican's letter that actually motivated the Senate Appropriations Committee to consider an increase. So sometimes, even in 2025, we've got to go with the old school tactic, which is a billboard, believe it or not, of all these digital things that we do. Old school stuff still works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So your billboards urge people to text cures to get involved. So what specific actions is ACS can? This is complicated. To say ACS can is complicated.
It is. And I tell people, while I've worked here a long time, I did not get the opportunity to name our organization. So that is super unfortunate. So ACS CAN is really asking people who care about cancer, whether you're a cancer patient, a survivor, a loved one, just somebody who thinks fighting cancer is really important, to get involved with our campaign. So if you go to fightcancer.org, so it's pretty easy to remember, there's a little button at the top you can enter in your email address. And what we're doing is reaching out to people to ask them to email their members of Congress. We offer an opportunity to click a button. You can leave a voicemail message for your member of Congress. You can tweet at them. You can Instagram them. We have all these different activations. I think one of the things that's so important, and it sounds a little maybe quaint in 2025, if I'm being honest, but I remind people that the United States is not just a democracy, but it's a representative democracy. And what that means is those people in Congress that seem very far away from you are elected to represent your opinion. And so if we get enough cancer patients and survivors to call, reminding you that there are 18 million cancer survivors in our country, to just send one email, one text message, one phone call to say, hey, cancer research is really important to me. I understand that there are a lot of things our federal government can fund, and this has to be one of them. It will really, really make a difference. Members of Congress, regardless of their partisanship, really do serve at the pleasure of the people that elect them, and they want to hear from you. They want to hear why cancer research is so important. And so we're really excited to offer people the opportunity to get involved. It just takes a couple minutes. It's so easy. And it's really going to make such a huge difference. I remind people that every day, if you work in Congress and you're a member of Congress, you have a staffer who comes up to you and says, okay, boss, so today, this is how many emails we got, and this is what the topics were. And they say, we got this many for research, this many for this, whatever. This is how many phone calls. And so every day, members of Congress are being told what their constituents are asking about. And so it's a really important pulse check. And it's why something that seems so simple and maybe doesn't seem like the most impactful tactic is, in fact, really the right way to go.
This year, I'm so glad you brought it up. This year, I went to the NBCC Summit for the first time, even though I did go to Project Lead in 2018, and I've been a member of the National Breast Cancer Coalition for years, but I've never gone to the summit. This was the first time we went, and I went. And going to the Hill was the first time for me.
And you liked it, didn't you?
It was amazing, actually. This is something that everybody needs to experience, because you really see how the sausage is made, so to speak, right? And kind of.
Well, you see it. And I also think that especially in the metastatic community where I feel like people don't feel seen, and I understand why they don't feel seen. I love nothing better than, and the whole point of my organization is to take everyday people who care about cancer and get them to share their stories with elected officials. And a lot of these people, I've had people say to me, I don't even vote, and I'm going to go meet with my member of Congress. That feels weird. I tell them they don't have to be registered to vote to meet with your Congress, but if you want to learn, I can show you how. It's pretty easy. But I think there's, at a time when things feel so helpless, maybe when you're not sure how you can make a difference, you need to know that your voice matters and that your story matters. I think that cancer touches everyone. There is not a single member of Congress who is like, oh, cancer, that's not important to me. I've never heard anyone ever say that. But I do think that, particularly in the metastatic space, where the need for research, the need for more effective therapies, the need to understand how to stop metastases, all of these things, right, is so high.
Well, I have to tell you, what surprised me, again, this was a very eye-opening experience for me, and I want to repeat it. I'm definitely going to go next year. The staffers that we spoke to, and we actually did speak to one congressman from upstate New York. It was interesting. They had no idea what stage 4 breast cancer was. And you would think that NBCC does this every year and you guys do it every year. And people should, but no, the staffers, they're young people. They don't know what stage 4 breast cancer is.
And they need your help. Young people don't stay on Capitol Hill for their entire careers as much anymore. A couple years here, a couple years there. And that's why constantly talking about this, I have longtime volunteers who've been with my organization longer than me. And they say, I don't know, I feel like I was just up there. But it's new staff.
New
right?
staff, right? Absolutely. And so, what other initiatives would you like to highlight?
So, yeah, we're working on some rallies across the country, and in fact, are bringing over 700 advocates to Capitol Hill to meet with every member of Congress.
And how do people hear about it? And how does one get involved?
So, if you visit fightcancer.org, you can do that. And if you're on social media and you want to just lurk from home, which I know a lot of people do, that's hashtag Cancer Lobby Day, all one word. And you'll get to see some of the really amazing work that we can do there. I think it's so important for people to amplify, whether it's to like on Facebook or repost, to really start to spread the word. We're especially, too, looking for people to share stories. If you've ever been on a clinical trial, I'd love to hear from you. If you've ever interacted with an academic center that got funding from the National Cancer Institute, that's a story that we want to collect. We're also very involved in making sure that patients have access to health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of work this Congress to unfortunately create some changes that will force a lot of folks off Medicaid. This could be particularly important for some of your audience who might have Medicaid as their insurance.
And this is such a huge topic and it needs to be talked about. It's good that you're bringing it up because I kind of shied away from it.
I think, look, cancer is a long journey. And
Yeah.
for people with metastatic cancer, it's a really long journey, right? There are some times when some people might be on Medicaid. They might quit their job and get health insurance through a marketplace plan. There's actually some work in Congress right now to take away some of the tax credits that allow people, mainly self-employed or small business people, to afford their health insurance.
Yeah. I was just talking to a young woman who has metastatic breast cancer. She needs to go back to work in the fall because she's an educator. With her deficient immune system, she is in treatment. She still has to go back to be a teacher among young kids. And there's no way for her to just stop working because of this 24 months period where you can't get Medicare when you have stage 4 breast cancer or other cancers as well.
People with metastatic disease well understand the value of health insurance, how important have insurance every day. And telling that story of why having health insurance is so important, again, is another way of sharing your story. And while it feels so small, It's not small. And it's a challenge too, because as we eliminate different ways for people to get insurance, so let's just use this young woman as an example. So maybe she could quit her job. Do not recommend, but quit her job and maybe start a small business or work at a small business. But she would need to be able to enroll in a marketplace plan, right? Would need to be able to afford that, which I think is very challenging. Congress doesn't understand the implications of what they do. They make many, many decisions every day. They don't really understand what it means to different people. They've never thought about the example of the woman that you're talking about, having metastatic disease, being in active treatment, really having a compromised immune system. And any parent out there can tell you what a school setting or even a daycare setting can mean for you being sick. I think these are the things that we really need to raise up for people, because oftentimes I think people say, well, this person just doesn't want to work. No, actually working could be very harmful.
With my career in investment banking, it would have been impossible for me to work and be in long-term treatment. So I was very lucky to be able to go on disability and have my husband's insurance cover me, but not everybody's as lucky as I am, obviously.
That's something that we need to really continue to think about, especially with more and more cancer being diagnosed at an earlier age. It puts women very far away from traditional Medicare because they're being diagnosed so young.
Yeah, I know. We only have a few more minutes left. So what message would you have for us, people living with metastatic breast cancer and who may be concerned about budget cuts and the implications on their treatment?
So I think the first thing that I would say is living with metastatic disease is really hard. And so I want to take a moment to hold space and honor the journey that you're on and really recognize how hard it is, right, to live with this disease and to constantly have to explain to people about your disease and what it is to have metastatic disease. I can only imagine how exhausting that is for folks. But I do think that people with metastatic disease are fighters. Even if you don't start out that way, you learn to be a fighter. And part of being a fighter is using your voice, speaking up, whether it's with your care team or, wait for it, with an elected official and your member of Congress, to really say loudly that you need there to be more medical discovery in the fight against this disease. You need the opportunity for more treatments. You need the opportunity for more research that could potentially improve your quality of life. That is very important to your community. And no one will know that unless you take the opportunity to share your story and to speak up. It's not every moment of I was diagnosed and then this and that. Like, this isn't a medical history that we're asking you to share. It really can be quite short. Sometimes it's just a couple minutes to tell your story. But the importance of getting people with metastatic disease to speak out all across the country, regardless of whether you like your member of Congress or don't like, agree, disagree, doesn't matter. Remember, they're there to represent you. And you need to log those concerns by getting involved, whether it's with my organization or another organization. Just know that your voice really, really matters. As somebody who's been doing this for a long time, I can tell you members of Congress are occasionally, not always, but occasionally very touched by what they hear. And it's your story that will make that difference for someone else. And I know that that is something that is near and dear to every cancer patient, is the desire that no one else walk the exact same journey that you did, that you leave your journey a little bit in a better place for someone else, because you know how hard this disease can be on you and your friends and your family. And so part of that is getting involved and sharing your story with elected officials.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think this was a great interview.
Well, I appreciate it. It's something that I'm incredibly passionate about.
And that comes through.
I'm lucky to have fallen into this job.
So, yeah, me too. I've kind of fallen into my job and I discovered that I'm really passionate about this. And in a way, cancer gave me an opportunity to explore other things, other sides of my personality. And I'm grateful. So thank you again. Thank you for being here. And thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Future at Risk. Today, we heard from Pam Traxel about the power of advocacy and the importance of making every patient's voice count. We explored how public policy shapes cancer research and care, why federal funding through organizations like the NIH and NCI is so crucial, and how even small actions like sharing your story or contacting your representatives can make a real difference. Pam reminded us that while the experience with metastatic cancer is challenging, it's also filled with opportunities to create change, support one another, and push for progress. Whether you're a patient, survivor, caregiver, or advocate, your voice matters in the fight against cancer. If you'd like to get involved or learn more, visit fightcancer.org. And as always, thank you for listening, for sharing your stories, and for being part of this community. In our next episode, we will explore the urgent challenges facing cancer research in the wake of federal funding cuts, the real-world impact of shrinking resources, and the hope that drives scientists to keep pushing forward. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and leave a review. It really helps. Follow us on social media at Live from Stage 4 and visit our website at www.livefromstage4.org for show notes and links. This episode was hosted and produced by Victoria Goldberg. The patient composite was written and read by Abigail Johnston. We want to acknowledge Christine Olson for her invaluable assistance with this episode. Huge thanks to Ellen Landsberger, Martha Carlson, Judy Perkins, Linda Weatherby, Jill Tirabassi, and Alexis Desai for helping get this podcast off the ground. Special thanks to James Burrows, the talented composer who created our musical intro. James, your music sets the perfect tone for every episode. We appreciate you. Take care. Until we meet next again in 2 weeks.